What's up, Zach here, and today I've got the LeBron 4 Retro. Now, a lot is known about the LeBron 4 Retro because it's a retro. These are the 4s. We're on the 21st version of the LeBrons. However, there is still a lot of surprises to these shoes, especially in the category of, number one, the breathability, especially for its weight. Number two, the midsole and the orientation of the zoom in that midsole. But number three, I think most importantly, is the overall build of the uppers and how they interact with that midsole and outsole, which is different from some other foamposite products I have seen in the past. These shoes definitely still have some questions yet to be answered about them. So, let's get into them. Now, starting off in the uppers, obviously these are foamposite shoes. The interesting thing about the foamposite of the LeBron 4 is that it's connected in the middle by these quasi-elastic bands. They're not really elastic bands, but they are serrated, so they do move a lot better. Now, underneath of that shell is a really thick layer of upper material on the inside of the shoe. Now, it is netted in the tongue. However, on the underside of that, it is a solid piece of material. Now, this does integrate into the strobel board, right? And then on the outside of that is kind of like the foamposite, which is backed with some more textile materials where the shoelaces go into. Now, if you have to change the shoelaces in these, good luck. It is pretty hard to get somebody with small fingers in there. Obviously, someone like me with the hands of an elephant is not going to be able to get in there and change them very easily. However, the lockdown of them, because of that lacing system, because of how much surface area the laces do contact with that foamposite, is really surprisingly good. The thing that I don't love about the LeBron 4s, and I love Velcro on any shoe, I love straps on shoes, but one of the biggest reasons I like the KD 14s, I know there's a lot to like about the KD 14s, I liked the scythe on them. To me, I just wish it was just a little bit lower. I get it, it's part of the ankle collar, but if I could just pull down on it a little bit more and just have a little bit more of a solid piece to put it in, because remember, this piece is also a little bit flimsy, I feel like you would actually aid in the lockdown versus just with this. It's basically just, I think, more of just a psychological thing here with this strap. Now, if you look at these on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, the burr does start to get into like the under layer of it. You don't actually get into the foamposite, but you can start to see it. I think if you're dragging and sliding these on a court, you're getting really shifty with these, and really, you know, kudos to you. However, if you do play like that and you do drag a lot on outdoor courts, these are gonna start to look a little bit weird. But I think way more important than the upper durability is the breathability of the LeBron 4s, which is just fascinating. I did this test a couple times because I just didn't trust my results. They all came back the same. On the breathability mapping, you look at it, put the fog machine in there, and just fog is blowing out of the tongue, which I didn't think it would because the material underneath of it is pretty solid. However, still enough pores in it to get it through the tongue, and that translated to the breathability test. With that heat gun, it only heated up 97.8 degrees, which I just thought was a miracle in these shoes, to be honest. The Curry and Tough Crowd Spawn Flotro felt much warmer under my foot versus the LeBron 4s, which, you know, mismatch in weight and you know, and feel for sure. But I'd say for a shoe this heavy, especially if you're just walking around in these, like if you're using these as just a kick around shoe, I mean, they're not gonna be that bad. Now, of course, once I took the heat gun off, and even after a few minutes, there were some parts of the shoe that were still very, very, very warm, right? But the shoe in general, it was letting go of heat. It just shows you, just because it's a foamposite shoe, doesn't mean you can't engineer it to breathe okay. And that also has a lot of implications for fit, especially with the 4s, but also I think in the future of foamposite shoes. The midsole teardown in LeBron 4 was the most fascinating to me. It only had a little bit to do with the drop-in midsole, although the drop-in is very interesting to look at. Now, the drop-in, you can actually see the pores in the polyurethane there from the drop-in. However, it does not look the same as the foamposite material in the uppers, so it is a little bit of a different, you know, polyurethane compound in there. I'm not sure exactly what they used in there, but it is very porous and flexible, but it is not the exact same as the uppers, at least, you know, to the naked eye and as well as under the microscope. Now, the Zoom Air unit in the drop-in midsole, speaking of, does not go entirely full length. It really ends kind of where, you know, the metatarsal head. That's really the extent of it. And there's also some other things about that Zoom Air unit and the drop-in that we really need to know when we get to the bounce height test, which is really important too. Now, if you look at the uppers here, especially here in the forefoot, if you follow my finger from the tip of the lace line around the shoe, shoe. This is one continuous shell of foam posit that goes all the way around the shoe and then up into the heel counter. Now, on a lot of foam posit shoes, where the midsole integrates with the uppers of the shoe, it is not continuous. In this one, it is just one continuous foam posit shell around your foot. So it actually does feel like a cocoon around your foot. So in terms of a drop-in midsole shoe, the LeBron 4 is going to feel a lot more stable. Now, of course, it is super heavy and super bottom heavy at that, so it's gonna feel stable from that point, but also the stability comes from that entire cocoon of foam posit, which I find really, really cool. Now, if you look at the bottom of the shoe, underneath of the tread, it looks like there is an entire bed of carbon fiber in there. It's not, it's just plastic. However, because it starts almost at the way posterior part of the shoe and then goes almost all the way to the toes, it really follows the Zoom Air unit. It does still provide a lot of structure to the shoe. It also allows it to bend. That's why there's all those break points in the outsole, which correlates to all the break points in the drop-in midsole, which I find pretty cool. It would have been interesting to see what, carbon fiber would have done to these. I think they would have been even more unforgiving than they already are underfoot. Now, if you look at the bounce height test, this is where a lot of these drop-ins kind of show themselves, and it's no different for Zoom Air. Only got 32 centimeters in the heel, 31 in the forefoot. Now, typically those Zoom Air units on the bounce height test do very well. Obviously, full length zoom, right, or zoom strobel doesn't get as high because it's a longer area to absorb all that impact, right? The shock is absorbed through a longer area. However, in drop-in shoes, it's even worse because there's nothing solid for that Zoom Air unit to kind of bounce off of, right? It's not connected to the shoe, it's not connected to anything. Now, that also translates into real life. So in this drop-in midsole specifically, in the LeBron, this Zoom Air unit to me is meant more for comfort, more for impact protection. It's not gonna really feel like anything bouncy on the shoe, and with the shoe being so bottom heavy, I don't really think any level of zoom was gonna do much. And looking at the outsole tread of the LeBron 4, it really is a neat design. It does have a few different applications. Number one, all the serrations or break points in it makes it a little easier to bend, which makes it a little bit more forgiving for being so heavy. Number two, though, those break points also help it grip better when there's actually a human foot in the shoe, because as you're bending it, these actual, macro breaks in the tread are going to grab onto the court versus just the herringbone in them. Also, just the shape of this midsole is very flared in, right? So once again, because the shoe is so heavy, you really can't make this shoe a clunker in terms of its shape too, or else the transition of step would just be really off, right? Like, you can't make the LeBron 4 like a barefoot style shoe where you just never move anywhere. Now, if you look at this tread on the grip test ramp, which I swear everybody in the comments thinks that I stole these pieces of flooring from their particular gym. I'm like the Grinch of basketball. But yes, weighted and unweighted. The LeBron 4's slip at 26 degrees. Now that's compared to something like the Anta Shockwave 5, which didn't slip until 35 degrees. Yes, both weighted and unweighted. So as you can see, that actually shows the limitations of these types of tests, because yeah, the LeBron 4, when I'm just kind of on the court and just kind of seeing how it feels, it is not the most gripping shoe out there. Once you allow the shoe to break in so that it bends a little bit easier, these little macro cuts in the tread are allowed to grab a lot better. So when you're charging the rim, right, when you're cutting into the hoop and you're really putting a lot of force in the shoe and bending, that shoe is going to have a lot more traction versus if you're just standing cold on the three-point line and then trying to shimmy step out of the way to get some separation. It's just not going to work the same in those two areas. So you really have to combine those two pieces of information. Also, somebody like LeBron, who's a lot heavier than someone like me and puts a lot more force in their shoe because he's playing a lot harder, he's going to be able to bend that shoe a lot easier and kind of push those big macro channels into the ground to get a lot better grip. Now, if you look at it on the speed ratio, honestly, I thought this was going to be the first shoe that came in at negative. However, it comes in at a 1.34, which pretty representative of the shoe. I honestly don't even know if it's that high. Honestly, that might be overselling it. And because there is nothing rigid in the midsole, yes, they will bend, but there is nothing to give you any snapback on these. So it is your own leg strength that is doing everything with this shoe. The shoe is basically just a shipping container. Now, if you look at it on the outsole durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper. The translucent rubber, really not a millimeter of damage because there's so much surface area. The durometer of it is actually lower, at least on my durometer, than the herringbone, but the herringbone got about a millimeter of damage. So I think think if you keep this on indoor courts, it should be okay because there is 2 different types of rubber on there. Honestly, I think it's going to aid in a little bit of the durability, and because you're grabbing traction from so many different areas on the shoe, they're going to be a little more durable on an indoor court. However, on a gritty outdoor court, these are going to start to rub raw pretty quick. And getting into the fit of the LeBron 4s, these were surprisingly forgiving. The metatarsal width is pretty forgiving on these. Even with the drop-in, usually on drop-in shoes, you really lose a lot of width as well as some length because they have the sides that kind of ride up on the shoe to keep it stable. Now, I'd say if you're a narrow or medium foot, I think for a narrow foot, if you want to go down a half size, as long as you're not a longer toed person or your foot's not long, I think you can, just to get the weight down on them. However, anybody else, because this is more of a standard length shoe, you probably just want to go true to size of 4E, I think. Go up a half size. If you're just using these for kicking around, go up a size if you're a 4E, but if you're trying to play in these, I wouldn't go up more than a half size just because it's gonna weigh you down so much. Now, if you are somebody with heel pain, ball of foot pain, these really aren't the best. Even with the Zoom Air unit in there, they are very unforgiving shoes because once they start breaking and they start bending more, as they start bending more, you get all that weight in the shoe, and it's hard to push off of them, so you're really putting a lot of force into the ball of your foot. So to me, it's hard. You can put a custom drop-in midsole if you've got a podiatrist or sports medicine, orthopedic surgeon that does a lot of foot and ankle stuff that can make drop-in midsoles exactly the thickness of your drop-in. I've done that for a few people, which has been interesting to do. But if you can't, and those are all obviously going to be ridiculously expensive, but if not, you can't put an orthotic in these, right? So because of the drop-in. So I'd say if you're really any of the snake bitten type foot, I don't know. I mean, I probably wouldn't be playing in these. Now, if you're just kicking around in them, try it. The Zoom Air is going to be a little bit more forgiving, but just in general, these are not really for the snake bitten foot, at least in my opinion. If you're somebody who wants containment, for sure, right? If you're somebody who has instability, right, then yeah, these are going to be containing as all get out. And play testing the LeBron 4 is where I really saw my limitations as a basketball player, although I know my limitations on the basketball court are limitless. But these shoes are meant for a much stronger player, a much taller player, just somebody with a lot more force in the shoe than I can provide. You know, I've played in tennis shoes that are very heavy and just, like I said, very unforgiving like these, and I do fine in them because my skills as a tennis player are a lot better. My legs are trained for tennis more than they are for basketball, so I can, use the tools of them. Whereas in these, I think if you are somebody with the weight and the strength of somebody like LeBron, then you're gonna get a little bit more out of these. I think they're basically meant as a container, right? They are meant for protection. And what I liked about the foam posit in them, like, with the fit, they're so much more forgiving for a wider foot than other foam posit shoes. Even like the foam posit Vapor 10s, the tennis shoe, which is supposed to be a light shoe, I can barely get my foot in those, whereas in these, they're really forgiving just because of the way the foam posit is connected over the top. So, they're a little bit more flexible than you think they would be on court. I think if you're not skipping leg day and you're training for basketball a lot, right? If your legs are trained for the rigors of basketball, in terms of foam posit, this is gonna be one of the more forgiving shoes out there. Like I said, especially for getting to the rim and protecting your feet in kind of those crowded areas. Are these gonna help you with, getting up over somebody else? No. Are they the shiftiest things out there? Absolutely not. But I think for what they are, at least I can appreciate them. And for someone like LeBron, who could play in an old pair of Chuck Taylors and probably still be one of the best out there, I think, these kind of serve their purpose in terms of, like I said, being a container for him and just, being something that protects him while he is kind of bringing all the tools to the shoe. Now, in terms of being a retro kick around shoe, yeah, they're fine. I wore these around the zoo all night. One night we were going to the zoo lights and it was fine. I think the biggest benefit they provide is showing in future foam posit shoes how you can make a foam posit shoe more forgiving, more flexible, easier for more foot types, and easier to break in. And speaking of these foam posits, these are not the only retro foam posit shoe to come out recently. There has been the Supreme Nike Court Posit that has recently come out, an old Nike court shoe made for Andre Agassi with foam posit, which is really a fascinating product that just came out as a Supreme drop. I will leave that video linked up above, and make sure you subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam, and of course, foam posit. I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.